Okay, so today, for Python 102, so far we've looked at basic functions. We've looked at searching and sorting. Today we're going to look at classes and objects. So this is like classes and objects are part of object-oriented programming. Like from C, the C language doesn't support object-oriented programming, classes or objects, but once you move to C++ and Java, they introduce classes and objects. And Python also supports classes and objects, object-oriented programming. And let me get my earphones here. Okay. So the we've already looked at some classes or objects. For example, here. Oh, I also have 2 tutorials up that I'll throw up here. So we've got kind of a more basic tutorial here with classes, introducing. So I guess like an introduction would be better. Like first of all, so the syntax for a class, when you want to introduce a class, it's just you use the word class and then the name, right, and then a colon, and then the class can have classes are complex objects, right? So complex data types. So a class can have attributes and it can also have functions. So can you think of an example in Python, examples of classes that we've already used that have attributes or functions attached to them? Right, string. So let's take. So you're already familiar with the concept. We just haven't created one. So let's say we take hello world, right? And let's say this is a string. Okay. So when you do this, you've created an instance of a string, but in Python, string is not just a simple data type. It's a class that has several attributes and functions attached to it. So what are some functions or attributes of string that you can call on? Do you remember any kind of? Yeah. So like if there are functions that can operate on classes or objects, for example, like length, right? But this is not, but length is not a function of string, right? You can run length on a lot of different types, right? But there are also functions contained in the class itself. So sample string, split, right? So here, yeah. Is there, you can use mine, I guess. If the KIMEP one's not working. So what's the difference between length and split? Who owns split? like, where is that? This is a function, length is a function, and split is a function, but they are owned by different classes.
Yeah.
Right?
String or something.
Yeah, so split is owned by the class string. Split is a function that's contained inside of the class string. So when the class string is defined, if you look at the definition, the class definition for string, split is one of the functions under that class. If you try to call this function by any other object, it's not going to, for example, like if I try to, let's say I have a list, let's say I have a sample integer equals 5, right? Now, if I try to run length on this, I think it will let me run length on this. Nope, int has no length. Right, if you try to run split, it'll say the int object has no attribute split, right? So the int object, of course there's an integer 5 which is assigned to this memory space, but Python, when you create this variable, Python doesn't only save a 5 to it, it instantiates a much more complex class called int. And that class has a lot of functions attached to it, which are things that you can do to an int. For example, you can round an integer, you can like divide it. They're like, we can look at the class definitions. So the int object has no attribute split, right? So let's look at the class definition of string in Python. So you can see here the constants defined. So there are some constants, which I said are like attributes, right? And then there are let's see, constants, right, and some functions. Let me see, formatting, custom string formatting. So these are all like different types of functions. So the constants include like ASCII letters, lowercase letters, string. These are all like, this is a list of all of the attributes that you can. So the way that you access this is you just put dot and this thing without the function at the end of it, right? So for example, if we want to look at, let's look at ASCII uppercase in a given string, we can try that. So let's try let's make our hello world like this. Well, it doesn't matter. Okay, so and then let's look at some examine a string constant. So let's take our string, sample string, and then try and look at that attribute. Oops, there's no attribute. The string object. Oh, sorry. This is you can run this by itself. String. Oh. Oh, it's not. Class string. Why can't I get these? So it's not letting me access these functions or these from the let me see. Okay, but here, okay, so here are all the, these are all the built-in methods, for example, that you can use with string, right? And so you can see some examples here on the side too, these Python references. There's like string methods, list methods, dictionary methods. So these methods are functions that are owned by that type of object, right? So for string methods, these are methods that are in the string class, which you can apply. So capitalize, case fold, right? So you can capitalize you take sample string, run that. So it just, what does this do? It converts the first character, right? You can, we use index, is ASCII, let's see, is decimal, is identifier, is lower. These is, any function that starts with an is by convention are like true, false, they return a true or false. We've got left strip, right strip, split, strip. So for example, strip is very useful. Like if you have, say your string looks like this, right? Now, sample string, it's like this, right? But you don't want all that white space in front or behind it. So you can do strip, and you'll get the, it'll cut all of this kind of white space away, right? So anyways, like the, these are constants and methods of objects. But what if we want to create our own class, right? So let's say say you want to create, like we're going to make a bank account, okay? So let's call it my account. So what would you need? What should be included in a bank account? Huh? A username, account holder? Okay. So let's call this what, like username? Okay. Who wants to own a bank account? Let's call him John Doe. Okay. Okay, so I've just created an account. So how do I access this? I access this by, once you've created a class like this with a property X, you can create a function. You can call that class name as a function, right? And then assign it to something. And then you can look at dot whatever that variable is to access that value. So let's say account is the variable, right? Right now, John Doe exists nowhere, right? There is no instance. So this is a definition of a class, but we need to create an instance of that class. So right now we don't have any instance of this class, right? This is just the definition, just like when we had a function definition back in the first session, right? So just like when you define, you do def and then a function, you can define a function. That function exists only in the definition until you actually call that function. So this class exists only in the definition, and we haven't called it yet, right? So to call it, we can let's call my account like this, okay? And now I can say account. I can run account. I can also I can test the type of my account. What's the type of my account? before, if you run type on string, it says str, right? It's a string. If you run type on a list, you get list. If you run type on a whatever, if you run type on a my account, you get my account. It's a my account object because we just created the my account object, right? So this is how you can participate in Python, right? You can not only can you create functions. So think about the two things that we've created so far in Python. You've created what can you assign something to in Python? I mean, right? So yeah, a variable, right? So you've got like a right. So far, right? Things we can assign. First of all, variables, right? So username equals John Doe. Right? So you can assign values to a variable. You can also assign values. You can assign using a function. Right? So let's create a function. So what's a function that you might want to? Oh, what else should your account have? Huh? Yeah. Okay. So account balance 0. Okay. So let's first of all, once you have this account, then you can access these. You can access these attributes by using the dot, right? So in Python, the dot allows you to access the attribute of something, right? So we defined account, we created an instance of it, and now we are accessing the attribute, which is username, which is John Doe, right? And then we can access the balance. Sorry, account balance, which is 0. But what else might you want to do with an account, right? You don't want like a constant balance, right? So what's a common function that you might need for your account? What are some basic functions of accounts when you go to an ATM?
Get money.
Yeah. So you want to make a deposit, and you want to like withdraw money, right? Withdraw money and deposit money, right? So those are functions. What are they a function on? On your balance, right? So you can also define a function, which will be deposit, make deposit. So we'll call this, so let's just double check here. See, with the class, you can, inside of the class definition, you can assign attributes, but you can also assign functions, right? And when you create a function inside of the class, now the class owns that function. The object owns that function, right? Because usually it's going to be a function on other attributes or other functions inside of that class, right? So we're going to define. So for make a deposit, what are you gonna? We'll define this, and then there'll be some parameter. What should our parameter be for making a deposit? Any parameters that we need?
Oh.
Yeah. So maybe the deposit amount. Okay. And then what do we want to do to, what should our function be? Yeah, so what's the actual function?
Plus equals the amount.
Uh-huh. Plus equals, yeah, that's it, right? So that's what making a deposit is, right? You have some kind of a deposit amount that you put in, and then you're going to update your account balance, right?
Professor, I think we must put the sum in the parentheses.
Let's see, where is this?
Because in order for us to call this method, right?
Right, yeah, we might need, let's see what happens. So if you do account, so now how do we count, to call this function is not random, like you can only run this function on specific instances of that account, right? So this, I want to call this like account 1, just to make it clear. This is not like any account, this is a particular account, this is account 1. And let's do make deposit. And let's put in $1,000. Oops. Takes one positional argument, but 2 are given. The should self be in there maybe? Let's see, 1 positional argument, but 2 are given.
But exactly vice versa, right? 1 is given.
Yeah. Let's see. So let's see here. Where's the class methods, class objects, method objects. Okay. So yeah, so we need self. So we're passing in the class and the deposit amount, and then this will be self account balance, I think. Yeah, so let's try that. Okay. So it did it. And we can just say, maybe we can say deposit amount. Right. The string here. Okay, so now we run this. Oops. Okay, what if we make another deposit? Right, and now our like we can do this repeatedly, right? And you can see our account balance is going up, right? Okay. So let's make one other function, right? So balance, that's great. Now what? I mean, like depositing money, what else? All right, so withdrawing money. So let's copy this, make a deposit, and instead of a deposit, we want to make a withdrawal.
I'm just curious, why don't you use F string a bit? F string. No.
Where's that?
It's like you put F
Uh-huh.
for.
Oh, I know.
Okay.
I know. Yeah, that's an old C carryover. Okay, so here, I don't know if the minus equals, so we're going to make withdrawal. There's self. Okay, so let me just to clarify, like self is the instance of the object, right? So because self here, self is what? Self is whatever instance of this class. So, you know, the make deposit function knows that you're, right, when you call the make deposit function down here, right? So it's account one, make deposit. This self, it's going to pass itself into the function as a parameter. And why is that? Because this function make deposit wants to access some of the values, right? It wants to access this, but this doesn't exist like generally. It exists specifically within the account one object, right, or instance of that object. So in order for this function to be able to access these variables or these constants, which are in this version of itself, it needs to reference itself. So that inside of the function, when you call, if you want account balance, you can call account balance is the attribute of self, right? And you just use self because you don't want to like have to repeat this my account every time, right? And it's not my account. It's actually it's not the class generally. It's the specific instance of that class that you created, right? So it's passing itself in, and then it's allowing you to access account balance and alter that. And then when you report it, you also have to report, you know, the self.account balance. Deposit amount doesn't need to be, it's not self because this number is coming in from the outside, right? It's not an attribute of the class, right? That's being added outside. So for withdrawal, we self account balance minus equal to withdrawal amount, and then right. So let's define this and then see if this works. Actually, I want to just kind of show this kind of incrementally. Okay, so when you add, so we're going to add this withdrawal function, and then let's okay, so remember, let's instantiate this again. So let's say okay, so here we've created a new account, account two. You can see the account two is John Doe and 0, right? So you're going to make the withdrawal of $1,000, and now we've withdrawn $1,000. Oh, sorry, we should have written $1,000 has been withdrawn from your account, from your balance. Yeah. Okay. So now your current balance is minus 1,000, right? So our function, right, did an error check, right? Like the way that we made this, we allowed it to withdraw like negative, right? So how could you prevent that? Yeah, so in your function, when you make withdrawal, and then if the withdrawal, then you could just put an if statement up in here and say, if the withdrawal amount is greater than the current balance, then sorry, right? Like you have insufficient funds, right? Else you can put this one, right? So let's just do that. So what would that code be like? What would that be? Okay. We're very familiar with that. Right. Great. What about this? Yeah. Right. Your current balance is $1 billion. Right. So how was I able to use the withdraw function to add money to my account? Right. So that doesn't seem very safe or realistic. So how can we prevent that?
If the number is negative,
Uh-huh.
or withdraw.
Okay, so for withdrawals, we only want to treat positive numbers, right? Well, the way that we've written it, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. So, I mean, we could have written it, we could have written it either way. Yeah. So we need to add another thing in here. If withdrawal amount is greater than or equal to 0, then do these things, right? Else what? Else, nice try. Okay. So these are the kind of things when, I mean, and people who are like, this is more of an issue for people who are creating software, right? So Python typically is not used for software engineering, right? Like this would be things that like Java or C++ or C#. But this is what they will be thinking of. Like they will be thinking of all the possible ways that somebody could break their functions, right? Their classes, right? And so you have to kind of go through these and okay, so we've created a deposit function, a balance function, right? What if we, okay, so now let's instantiate class. What if right now I can only create an account by using this generic, oops. Right. And we've got right, John Doe with a balance of 0. But normally that's not how I want to create an account, right? Normally when I create an account, I'm going to have a username, right, and an account balance, right? Maybe you'll make an initial deposit, right? And then you want to be able to create the account using with the, so So we've talked about how you can like modify, we don't have any functions in here to modify the username, right? So like maybe we want to include that, maybe we don't want to include that, right? But that's okay. Oh, one more thing for safety. Yeah. Oh, we'll talk about privacy next. Yeah. Yeah, I'll come back to that. Okay, so creating so there's a way that we can create a certain type of function that gives us some variation of this, right? So there could be, maybe we want to just create an account that way and create with a John Doe account with a 0 balance, okay? Maybe we want to create an account with a 0 balance and you just give me a username and then I will create an account with a username and a new username and a 0 balance, right? Or maybe I want the option of creating an account with a new username and some initial non-zero balance, right? So there's some options to do this. This is called the class, what is this called? Class instance. Anyways, it's this, right? So it's defined init. So this is the, so we're going to take this class that we already have, but we're going to add some additional special functions, right? These are not, we've got my account, but I'm going to add some special functions here. Special functions, these functions are functions that I call after I have an instance of the class, right? I created my class account 1, and now I can make deposits and make withdrawals. But I'm going to create some special functions that allow me that for when I call the class in the very beginning to instantiate that class, right? So so these are, I'm going to call these just class constants, or these are also called in Java, these are called attributes. I will call these class methods. In Java, we call these, I think, attributes and methods. Yeah, sometimes methods, functions. Okay, so I'm going to create another set of functions, which are called yeah, they're also function. They're also methods, but yeah, I'll just call these instantiating methods, but they probably have a better word. Okay, so it's going to be yeah, it's double underscore init, like this. The name of this function is the name of the class, right? But how are you going to know when you call my my account parentheses with some parameters in it, whether it's this one, like the original one, or this one? So the way that you know is because the number of parameters are going to be different. Okay, so our initial one is just this. We don't actually have to write this. This is redundant, right? But so the initial one, which has no parameters, so the original one, this is just redundant. When you call my account, it passes in itself, and self username is defined as John Doe, self account balance is defined as 0. Okay, but now let's create one where we can specify at the time of calling that, creating the new account, we can specify a new username. Okay, so we'll create another instance of this, and we'll say new user. Okay, and now we're passing in the new username at the time that we're creating that class, whatever it is, and then we're going to assign that new username to our class username. Okay. So the default is John Doe, but if I use this function to create the account, right, this version of it allows me to pass in a new username, and that will be the original username of the account, right? And then the account balance is set to 0. Okay? And let's create one more where maybe I want to define the new username and the some initial deposit. Okay? And now this initial deposit will be the account balance, right? So now I have 3 ways. I have 3 functions, 3 options for instantiating my account. Right? The first is without any parameters, and in that case, the username will be assigned John Doe, and the balance will be 0. Or I can call my account and pass in a username, and that will define the username, but it'll set the account balance to 0. Or I can call my account and specify the new username and the initial deposit, and those will be set, right? So let's try these out. So first account, let's just call this account A, will be my account. Oops. Let's see.
I'll see for the very first time.
What if I have, can I do
Maybe you should eat mouse, maybe a mouse.
class multiple init functions? Oh, constructors. Yeah, that's what they call them, constructors. Is it not going to let me do it? Maybe call. Okay, I don't mess with it right now. Let's I think in other languages you can do this. Let's just let's just use this one. Sorry. Okay, so here we're just going to go with this one with the new user and initial deposit. So when I'm creating a new account, sorry. So first of all, can I still do my account by itself? Probably not. Okay, so now it's expecting new user and initial deposit. So we need to specify a new user. So who wants to be the new account holder? Lady Gaga. And what's her initial deposit? $10,000. Okay, so now we've got a new user with an initial deposit. Now when we create this account, we're going to put in the new user and initial deposit. Okay, and now we've got account A. One more I want to show you. We've got count A, so we can look at new user. We can look at, sorry, what's the username and account balance. Okay, right. So that's how you can, this is the, in this constructor. So you can define a constructor. I think there are ways to hack this, because like in Java, like you can define as many constructors as you want, and they're all just different based on, you know, like whatever attributes you want to put into them. Okay, so that's a class constructor. Two more things I want to show you with this before we start doing an exercise. The first one is class string. So the string function for accessing class constants.
So keyword arguments.
What's that?
I think you can do like that with keyword arguments.
For string?
Huh?
For the string or for the constructor?
For constructor.
Um,
You're gonna into the cell of the initiate constructor. You're gonna put two asterisks and keyword arguments.
so here's the okay, so class. So this is the class, this is a string method in Python. And it runs a string representation, it creates a string representation of the object. So so for example, you could say you have account A. If you just run it right now, it just says this, right? And if you want to access username and balance, right? Like you can call these attributes one at a time. But suppose you want to treat this as suppose you want to look at suppose you want to make this object like more accessible with other kinds of functions, right? Because nobody else in Python knows what my account is, right? We only know that because we just created it. But you can create like kind of a summary, a string summary of your account, like as a using a function. So I'm gonna copy all this, go down here.
Sir,
Here, can we do it afterwards? I want to keep going with it. Yeah. So so here's the class string representation, and it's a lot like this, but you're just passing in self, right? And now you can print. I think it's print. Or return, let's see. So what do we want to return about this object? Like if somebody calls this and just wants like a quick summary or string representation of this object, what do we want them to be able to see? Maybe just a username and balance, right? So you can just write like here for sorry, it's not init, it's string. You can write your account name is username is self username, and your balance is self account balance. Okay, so now if you try so up here we're gonna we have the username here, right? But you could also run this. Oops. I think you run. Oh, sorry, it's not account balance. It's right? So this allows, this creates a string representation of your object, right? And that way, sometimes if anytime like a function calls your object thinking that it's a string, this is what it'll get, right? So, but I think it's also nicer to just like create a summary, right? Like a summary statement. So like print your account details or something like that. So you can also just create another function, right? Let's just add another function. These are just different ways to report. So maybe you just want to, because this is another thing when you like check your balance, right? Check your balance. So here we'll just do self. We don't need to pass in any parameters, right? Other than self. We'll just print greetings, self username. Your current balance is and now if we create this account, it'll show that, but we can also do another kind of customized, any kind of customized reporting functions like check balance, right? And it'll give us that, right? So you can customize these as much as you want, right? So it doesn't only have to be a string, but it could be a kind of complicated output function, right? And we've done this before when we were doing like the fruit basket or like, you know, how many, right? Like create this kind of print function, right? So this is the same idea, but now it's something that you can call on a class that has these attributes. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is scope and privacy. Right? So let me show you something that's a little bit problematic about this class as we've created it. So account A, user account balance is $10,000, right? What if we do that? What do we just do? What did this line just do? Yeah, we just added $10,000 to that account, not using the ATM functions, right? Like we didn't use we created those functions like make a deposit, make a withdrawal, right? But we just added, so let's check the balance, right? So we just kind of subverted the ATM functions and added another $10,000 to her account, right? If you're a bank, you don't want that to be possible, right? You only want people. So sometimes one of the reasons why we create classes, and why we use object-oriented programming is for the sake of organization, right? Because the data structures are complex, right? An account may have like several pieces of information. It might have your username, it might have your ID, it might have your balance, it might have a list of prior transactions. And we want to keep all of that data kind of compartmentalized, right? For the sake of organization, it's complexity, right? Another reason is for the sake of security, right? So we might want to compartmentalize that information, and we might not want other people to see it. Right? We might want that information to be together, but we might want to restrict access to that information through specific requests that only we specify, right? So like we create these functions. The reason why we created these functions, make deposit and make withdrawal, is because maybe we want these to be the only ways that you can access your account balance, right? We only want you to be able to access your account balance through the function of making a deposit, which we have created with all of our error checking inside, right? Or make a withdrawal with all of our error checking inside, or like to just check your balance. And those are the only three things, the only three ways that we want the people outside of that object to be able to interact with that object, right? But here, I just subverted that, right? I just went straight for the attribute and like edited directly, right? So, but classes and objects give you a way to protect those inner attributes and not allow you to access them, right? Other than through the methods which you specify inside of the class. So this is called scope. And let's see.
No, Professor, I think as far as I know that in Java you can fully protect.
Uh-huh.
In Python you still can have access to those methods. You're going to use one other.
So I think you can. Let's see. Can we use? Oh yeah. So underscore. Yeah.
You use even two underscores, but even that.
So here in other languages, it's called private instance variables that cannot be accessed except inside of an object. However, the convention is so in Python, they don't have this kind of private variables, but they do have this kind of name prefix with an underscore. Yeah, so this single leading underscores. So here in Python, if they put an underscore in front of the function or in front of the method, then it means you're not supposed to access it. So I don't think, yeah, I don't think in Java, like you would just write like private here in front of this, right, like that. And then it would not allow you to access the attribute outside of the class. You can only access it from inside of the class using a function, calling a function. But I guess with Python, I guess there's no way to block this, yeah? So which again means like Python is a very bad language for creating software, like with security, right? But I'm just seeing if there's any other so okay, so let's do one more with classes multiple instances. Okay, so how would you transfer money? from one account to another account. Okay. So I want you to create create two accounts with non-zero balances, right? And write a function to transfer money from one account balance to another account balance. Let's say specify the amount of the transfer, right? Your function might want to check that the sending account has sufficient funds, right, for the transfer. So let's, why don't I give you about 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, and work on this one. So I'm gonna, I'll save this to Moodle right now. You could download it if you want, so that you have everything. And then I just want you to kind of follow the steps. Create two accounts, specify the amount you want to transfer, and then write a function, a class function to transfer money from one account to another account. Am I not? Okay, so we're doing this exercise to transfer money from one account to another. We're going to create two accounts with non-zero balances. Then we'll specify the amount of the transfer, and we write a function to transfer the money from one account balance to another account balance. Now, when you transfer money, right, make sure that the amount transferred is added to one account and deducted from another, right? And also check that the sending account has sufficient funds for the transfer, right? So actually, this so this function to transfer money from one account to another may not actually be a function of one particular account, right? It might be a generic, it might be a general function, right? Because you could either write it as a function outside of the two accounts, or you could write it as a function of one of the two accounts. So I'm going to start kind of slowly. Oh, yeah, sorry. Back to KIMEP. Let me upload this code to.
So if it worked out, should we show you or?
So let me I'll walk through it, and then we can yeah. Oops. Okay, so I put it here. It's session. It's not matching parsing, but anyways, it's session 3. Okay, so how did you create your two accounts? Who was your first user?
Mine.
Yeah.
The the existing one.
Oh, okay.
So,
Okay. So we had John Doe.
oh,
Okay, so we've got,
I thought you're talking about the method.
yeah. So we've got John Doe with $1,000 and account B. Lady Gaga with $10,000. Okay, fine. And we can check their balance. Okay, so wait, great. We've created 2 accounts. So how did you do how much and what's the transfer amount? How much do we want to transfer? How much do we want to transfer? Who's going to transfer to who, and how much do we want to transfer?
Lady Gaga transfer.
Okay. So transfer amount's 1,000. Okay. So did you do the transfer function inside of a class, or did you do it outside of a class? Inside. So how did you do it? Oops. So we can define a transfer. Okay. Okay. So if it's inside of a class, what does it need to?
So it should indicate self.
Mm-hmm.
Then I indicated another account
Mm-hmm.
and the amount.
Okay. And then what's it gonna do?
Then it's gonna do the balance. It's gonna add the amount.
So self. So right. So let's see transfer. Let's do transfer in funds. So because this is, yeah. So this is gonna say this is John Doe, for example. Say John Doe is self and Lady Gaga is the other, and the transaction amount is 1,000. Then that's going to add the transaction amount to self and
then other account balance. We need to add if else.
Yeah. Okay, and then anything else?
Oh, we can just we can check their balances, both self to check balance and other.
Yeah, and we can use this here. We can actually use the self check balance function and the other check balance, right? To update, to show what the new balances are. Right. Okay, so let's run this. Okay, so to transfer amounts 1,000. So how are we going to instantiate this?
So account A in parentheses.
And now we got to call the function.
Yeah.
Transfer in funds. Right. So the way that we wrote it here, account A and account B are interacting, but we're writing the function, we're calling the function from inside of account A, right? And so in this case, account A is the self, account B is the other, and then the transfer amount's 1,000. And so when we call this, it should add the transaction amount to self and subtract it from the other, right? And then report out what's happened. So let's do this. Yeah, and let me actually just give us some spaces here, right? So that, our very generic check balance function that we're using to print these out are a little bit cheeky in the context of a transaction, right? But we could have changed it like, John Doe, your balance has increased, your like $1,000 has been subtracted from yours, 1,000 has been added to yours, but anyways, right? So we can verify this. So what if now the cool thing is we created this function generically in the class, and Lady Gaga, account A and account B both have access to this function. So let's have John send $1,000 back. So how would we do that? Let's have John send $1,000 back to Lady Gaga. How would we do that? Yeah, so Lady Gaga also has access to the transfer in funds function, right? Because she also has an account class. So in that case, we can just have account B transfer in the funds from account A for the same amount. And now the accounts have been, the amounts have been swapped back, right? And then if we wanted to add a little bit of error checking in here, right, just to make sure, how would we do some error checking? Just to make sure that whoever is sending has the sufficient funds. So who has to have sufficient funds here? Self or other? Yeah, so when we call this function, the way that we've written it, right, when self is calling this function, the amount is being transferred from other to self. So other has to have a sufficient balance, right? So here, if other account balance is greater than or equal to a transaction amount, right, then we'll do this. Else print. And here we can actually say their name. So let's say other username has, other username has insufficient funds. So let's say here, John Doe, Lady Gaga to John Doe, or let's say John Doe to Lady Gaga, and John Doe has 1,000. Let's say he wants to transfer. Now here for transfer amount, we can just put in a number. We don't even have to write the variable, right? So let's just put in 2,000 here, right? So this is account B is Lady Gaga, who is trying to transfer in funds from John Doe, $2,000, but we know John Doe only has $1,000 in his account. So if we run this, sorry, John Doe has insufficient funds, right? Okay, so I like this example just to show kind of, to just recap here. We've looked at basic functions, and now we've looked at classes and objects. So you've got we have variables, and we also have functions, and then objects can variables and functions can be owned by classes, by objects. And what's the difference between a class and an object? So just to be clear, my account is the blueprint. That's the class. Okay. Account 1, which called that class, is the object. Right. So the objects are the instances of the class. So that's when we talk about classes and objects, that's the distinction. So my account is a class because it's a generic template for an object, and the object appears when you call that class. Right? And then it creates an instance of that class. An object is an instance of a class. Right? So you can have, for one class, you can have, multiple objects, right? Account A, account 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are all objects, and they're all instances of the class my account. Okay? And then we talked about how these are how you can define constants for a class. You can have functions for a class. So or methods, sorry, we call them methods, which are essentially functions that, and then we talked about error checking, right? When we're interacting with those class constants. And we also talked about constructors. So we'll call this a class constructor. Which is defining a function that allows you to create the class. Other languages allow you to create more functions. Other languages also allow you to protect constants. Python does not allow you to do that. So there are some kind of tricks or hacks you can do to do that, but Python does not is not built into Python. And then we can create a string function to create like a string representation of the class, or we can also just create like a more customized kind of function or method in the class to output like whatever to summarize, right, the attributes. And lastly, you can create functions where allowing like multiple instances of the class, multiple objects of the same class to interact with each other. Right? What's an example of a function that we've seen before that allows multiple objects, multiple instances of the same class to interact with each other? You can think of like the plus operator, right? Like the plus operator, like when you add like two integers, right? You can add one integer to another integer and you get a third integer. You can add two strings and it'll concatenate them into one string, right? So we're familiar with like taking two objects and allowing them to interact. You can also have like the append function where you can have a list and you can append another list inside of it, or you can append strings or integers into a list, right? And you'll see this with pandas as well. Like when we have two data frames, sometimes when you're doing anything with like joining or merging data frames, right? That's taking one data frame and another data frame. And sometimes you want to merge them on shared overlapping variables. Sometimes you want to like, maybe they have the exact same structure and you just like want to stack them, right? Concatenate them, right? So this kind of like, and sometimes like the, sometimes the functions that allow two objects of the same class to interact with each other are contained within that object, but sometimes they're external, right? So let me just spend 1 minute and make one more version of this function, right? It's not going to be an alternative function, not contained, let's see, external to the classes. Okay, so let's say I just define transfer funds, right? And this will have account 1 and account 2 and the transfer amount. Okay? So this is a function outside of the classes, right? And then account 1 let's see, account balance. So if account 2, let's see, account transfer funds from 1 to 2, right? So if account 2 account balance is greater than or equal to transfer amount, then account 1 account balance plus equals transfer amount. Account 2 account balance minus equals transfer amount, right? And you can here, but here there's no self and other. It's account 1, account 2, right? So this is the exact same function, more or less, right? But this function is not owned by any class. This function is external to the class. This is kind of a global function that exists outside of the two classes. And then instead of taking self and the other, right, it's just taking two accounts from outside, right? And so, and then when you run this, right, you can have account A, account B, transfer amount, right? And if you transfer it back, account, right? So it's the exact same function, but this exists outside of the classes. So these are decisions you have to make, right? With Python, a lot of times, some of the confusion that comes from Python, especially we'll see this in Python 201 when we get into like pandas, working with pandas. It's like it's arbitrary. Sometimes, you know, the thing that you want to do is a function inside of a class, and sometimes the thing that you want to do is a function external to the two classes. And the difference is, how did you call it, right? Here, when this function is defined external to the classes, you just call it. There is no object in front of it, right? Because it's a global function. And then the class is just, the objects are just inserted here. But when it's a function of the class, then you have to call it by first calling an instance of the object and then calling the function, right? And then the parameters in here are going to be very specific to, like, in relation to this object, right? So this is kind of tricky because sometimes it's one way and sometimes it's the other, and you never, like, when you're doing something, sometimes you'll figure out like, oh, I have to code it this way, not this external way, right? So you have these two options, both are perfectly fine. Sometimes it's a matter of like figuring out which one is which, or like which one is, you know, how's it a bit, like how the thing that you want to do, like, is it an external function or is it an internal class function? So, okay. All right, I'll throw this up and I'll see you guys next week. Have a good weekend. Thanks, guys. See ya.